Officer Daniel Hayes was not the kind of man who spoke much about himself, but people around him always said he had a steady spirit. He was the type who never hurried, never raised his voice, yet everyone listened when he spoke. His neighbors often waved to him when he walked to his car in the morning, wearing his uniform tall and straight, always ready for duty. But those who knew him best would say that the real star was not Daniel himself, but the dog that always trotted happily beside him, a strong German shepherd named Rex. Daniel and Rex were more than partners. They were like two halves of one story. When Daniel first joined the K9 unit, he was told that working with a police dog would not be easy. The training was long, and the connection between handler and dog could not be forced. Some officers lasted only a few months before asking to be reassigned. But Daniel was different. From the very first day he saw Rex, something clicked. Rex was younger then, full of energy, eager to prove himself, yet wild enough that trainers wondered who could handle him. Daniel walked into the kennel that morning, leaned down and said softly, "Hey, buddy, I'm Daniel." The dog looked at him with sharp brown eyes, and instead of barking or pulling back, Rex pressed his nose against Daniel's hand. That was the moment it began. Over the next weeks, the two trained together every single day. Daniel's voice was calm, never harsh, and Rex seemed to understand what he wanted before he even gave the command. Other officers teased Daniel, saying, "That dog's going to spoil you, Hayes. He listens better than we do." Daniel would just smile and shake his head. He never treated Rex like a tool. He treated him like family. When Rex succeeded in training, Daniel praised him like a proud father. When Rex struggled, Daniel knelt down and tried again, patient as ever. Slowly, the once restless dog became a disciplined partner, and the bond between them grew stronger each day. At home, it was the same story. Rex was not left behind in a kennel or locked outside. He lived with Daniel, shared the quiet evenings, and became a part of his daily life. Daniel's mother once visited his small house and laughed when she saw Rex stretched out on the living room couch. "Daniel," she said, shaking her head, "you've spoiled him more than I ever spoiled you." Daniel just chuckled and replied, "He's earned it." Rex followed him from room to room, always close, always watching. At night, the dog curled up beside Daniel's bed, and if Daniel ever stirred awake, Rex lifted his head as if to check that everything was all right. People around the police department began to notice how deep the connection had grown. Whenever Rex and Daniel entered the station, Rex's eyes never left his handler. If someone else tried to give him a command, Rex might obey slowly, but if Daniel spoke, Rex responded instantly, eager and alert. Younger officers sometimes joked that the dog was in love with Daniel, but the truth was simpler. Rex trusted him completely. It was a trust built from patience, kindness, and countless hours of working side by side. There were many long nights when they patrolled together, driving slowly through quiet streets while the city slept. Daniel often talked to Rex as if he were another officer. "Looks peaceful tonight," he would say, glancing at the dog. Rex would tilt his head, ears sharp as though listening closely. Sometimes Daniel laughed, telling stories only the dog could hear. It was a companionship that went beyond duty. They didn't need words. Silence between them was full enough. On weekends, Daniel often took Rex out into the countryside. They would walk along trails, the dog racing ahead, then circling back, his tongue hanging out with joy. Daniel carried a ball in his pocket and threw it across the fields, watching Rex sprint with all his strength to bring it back. Those were the simple moments that meant the most to him. He would sit on a log, scratching Rex behind the ears, and say quietly, "You're not just my partner, you're my brother." To anyone else, it might have sounded sentimental, but Daniel meant every word. Even Daniel's colleagues admitted that they had never seen such a partnership. They faced tense calls together, situations that tested courage, but Daniel always said he never felt alone. He had Rex beside him, steady and brave, ready to protect and follow his lead. It was almost as if Rex could read his thoughts, moving where Daniel needed him without being told. Once, after a long shift, one of the officers asked Daniel, "Don't you ever get tired? It seems like you and Rex never stop." Daniel smiled tiredly and answered, "It's easier when you trust the one beside you." The city respected Officer Hayes, but more than that, they respected Rex. Children would point excitedly when they saw the big German shepherd walking beside the tall officer. Parents felt safer seeing them together. In a way, they became a symbol of loyalty and protection, Some said Daniel and Rex reminded them of an old storybook image, a knight and his faithful hound inseparable, guarding the people quietly, with no need for praise. At home, Daniel often reflected on his life. He didn't have a family of his own, but he never felt lonely. Rex filled that space not just as company, but as a soul that seemed to understand him. When he read the newspaper in the mornings, Rex sat at his feet, sometimes nudging him for attention. When he returned from work late at night, Rex greeted him at the door with a wagging tail and bright eyes, no matter how tired he was. They were each other's constant. Friends sometimes asked Daniel why he never thought about transferring to another unit, one with fewer risks. He would shake his head gently. Because Rex and I belong here. This is what we're meant to do. He believed it with all his heart. For him, it wasn't just about the badge or the uniform. It was about living with purpose, serving with loyalty, and sharing every step with his partner. The story of Daniel and Rex was not just about an officer and his dog. It was about a bond that grew from respect and love. A bond so strong that people could see it without words being spoken. Every time Daniel walked into the station, Rex at his side, the world seemed just a little steadier, a little safer. They were more than partners. They were family. And in a world that often forgot the quiet power of loyalty, their bond stood out as something rare, something worth remembering. It was late autumn when the days started turning shorter, and a cool wind brushed through the city streets. Officer Daniel Hayes had worked several long shifts in a row, but he never complained. Rex still met every morning with the same energy, wagging his tail when Daniel picked up the leash. The two had developed a routine so natural that they barely needed to think. Daniel would take a sip of his coffee, pat Rex's back, and say softly, "Let's go keep the city safe, buddy." And off they went, ready for another day that looked ordinary but never truly was. That evening, the department received a call about a missing child near the Riverside warehouses. The boy had last been seen chasing a stray ball, and his parents were in panic. It wasn't a case of danger or crime, just fear and confusion. But Daniel volunteered immediately. He knew that Rex's nose could find what no one else could. When they arrived at the scene, the air was damp and cold. The river mist rose thick, and the sound of water lapping against the dock echoed in the distance. Daniel knelt beside Rex and whispered, "Find the kid, boy. Let's bring him home." Rex sniffed the small jacket the parents had given, then lowered his head to the ground and began to search. The two moved in quiet harmony through the maze of old warehouses. Other officers called out, but Daniel stayed silent, trusting Rex's instincts. Every now and then, Rex would pause, lift his head, and look back at Daniel for direction. Daniel gave a small nod each time, and Rex continued. After about an hour, a faint bark broke the stillness. It came from the far end of the yard. Daniel hurried over and found the little boy sitting behind a pile of boxes, frightened but unharmed. Rex wagged his tail, licking the boy's small hands as if to reassure him that everything was okay. The moment was gentle and pure. The parents ran forward crying with relief, and everyone clapped for Rex. Daniel simply smiled, kneeling beside his dog and whispering, "Good job, partner." News of their teamwork spread again through the department. The story was shared on the local paper under the title, "Police Dog and Handler Bring Missing Boy Home." Daniel never looked for praise, but when people in the community stopped him to say thank you, he always said the same thing. "It's Rex who deserves it." That humility made people respect him even more. In the following weeks, Daniel started to notice something different about Rex. The dog had become more alert, even protective, as if sensing that life was changing. Daniel had been offered a chance to train younger officers and new dogs at the academy. It was an honor, but he hesitated. He wasn't ready to leave the field yet. He loved the quiet streets at night, the moments of trust shared between him and his partner. When he told his mother about the offer, she said gently, "Maybe it's time for something safer." Daniel smiled. "I'll think about it, Mom, but Rex and we still have more to do out there." The following week felt strangely calm. The sky stayed gray and a thin drizzle fell most mornings. Daniel spent extra time grooming Rex, brushing his fur until it shone and checking his vest carefully. "You're looking sharp," he said. Rex wagged his tail, pressing his head against Daniel's leg. Their friendship had reached that quiet stage where words weren't needed anymore. One evening, while they were patrolling near the edge of the city, Daniel stopped the car and let Rex stretch his legs near the old bridge. The lights reflected softly off the water, Daniel leaned against the railing, watching his partner sniff around curiously. "You know," he said in a thoughtful tone, "I used to think working alone was easier. But you proved me wrong." Rex looked up at him, tail wagging, and Daniel smiled faintly. "You're more than a partner, Rex. You're family." As the days went by, people around the department noticed how the two seemed almost connected by thought. During training, when other officers struggled to control their dogs, Daniel and Rex moved like a single rhythm, calm, focused, steady. The head trainer often told recruits, "If you ever want to see what trust looks like, just watch those two." It became something of an example for others, a symbol of quiet dedication that needed no words. Then came a cloudy morning when the department gathered for a community event at a local school. Daniel and Rex were invited to show how K-9 officers worked. Children laughed and clapped as Rex performed simple commands. When Daniel told him to sit, Rex obeyed instantly. When Daniel said stay, Rex stood firm even as a small boy tried to tempt him with a biscuit. The crowd loved it. Daniel laughed too, patting Rex's head. "You see? Discipline and kindness go together," he told the kids. It was a small moment, but it stayed in everyone's hearts. That night after the event, Daniel returned home later than usual. He was tired but peaceful. He sat by the couch, Rex's head resting on his lap, and flipped through old photographs on his phone, pictures of them on duty, of Rex in training, and of the first day they had been paired together. His eyes softened as he whispered, "We've done a lot, haven't we?" He looked down at Rex, who was half asleep, and smiled. "You're a good boy. Always have been." The following morning came quietly, just like any other. Daniel brewed coffee, fed Rex, and packed his gear. He hummed a soft tune as he buttoned his uniform and checked Rex's harness. Outside, the sky was still pale from dawn, and the city hadn't yet woken up. As they walked out the door, Rex turned back once, looking at the home that had been their world for years. Daniel chuckled. "We'll be back soon, partner. Let's go." No one could have known that this would be their last morning together in that calm, ordinary way. Life has a strange way of giving no warning before changing forever. But on that day, everything still felt peaceful. The streets were wet from light rain, and the smell of morning air filled Daniel's lungs. He looked down at Rex walking proudly beside him, and for a moment, he felt something unexplainable, a mix of pride, gratitude, and quiet fear that he couldn't name. He reached down to pat Rex's back as they got into the patrol car. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "I'm proud of you." Rex gave a small bark as if answering him. The car engine started and they drove toward the station for their shift, unaware of how deeply that simple morning would be remembered by everyone who knew them. To the people who saw them that day, it looked like an ordinary patrol. But later, when others thought back on it, they would remember the calm on Daniel's face, the way Rex's eyes stayed fixed on him, the way the two of them seemed surrounded by something larger than duty, a quiet kind of love and loyalty that words could never describe. And though no one yet knew what was coming, those simple hours of rain, routine, and companionship would soon become the final peaceful chapter in a story that would touch every heart that heard it. The day of the funeral was covered by gray clouds. It was as if the sky itself carried the weight of sadness that everyone felt. The police department had prepared a full honor service for Officer Daniel Hayes, a man who had given everything to his work in his city. People began to gather early in the morning. Officers came in full uniform, standing quietly in rows. Neighbors, friends, and even people who had never met him personally arrived with flowers in their hands. There was a deep silence around the place, broken only by the sound of footsteps and the soft rustle of the wind. Rex arrived in a special car with another officer. He wore his polished K-9 vest and a small black ribbon attached to his collar. Since the moment Daniel had passed, Rex had not been the same. He didn't bark or play. He hardly ate. When people tried to comfort him, he only looked toward the door, waiting for someone who would never return. The officers who cared for him said that he sometimes whimpered softly at night, lying near Daniel's locker or the spot where they used to sit together. No one had the heart to stop him. They all knew he was grieving in his own way. When Rex reached the cemetery, the crowd turned to look. It was unusual to see a police dog at a funeral, but everyone knew that Daniel and Rex were not ordinary partners. They were family. An officer gently held Rex's leash as they walked to the front, where the casket rested under a flag. The chaplain stood nearby, his voice calm and kind, speaking about service, honor, and love. Some bonds, he said softly, do not end with life. They live on in loyalty and memory. His words carried across the rows of people, and several officers bowed their heads, struggling to keep their composure. Rex sat beside the casket, his ears slightly back, his eyes fixed on it as if waiting for Daniel's familiar voice to call him. The crowd could see the confusion in his expression. He did not understand why his partner was not moving, why everyone looked so sad, or why the air felt so heavy. He simply waited, believing that any moment Daniel would rise, smile, and reach out his hand. Daniel's mother sat near the front, her face pale but strong. Beside her was Emily, Daniel's younger sister, holding her hand. They had loved Rex deeply too, and seeing him there broke their hearts even more. Emily whispered quietly, "He still thinks Daniel will come back." Her mother nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I think part of him already knows he won't," she said softly. "But his heart won't let go." When the time came for the last salute, the department formed two lines, their heads bowed. The officer in charge raised his voice gently, calling Daniel's name one final time through the radio. "Officer Daniel Hayes, badge number 4291. End of watch." The static that followed seemed to echo forever. People began to cry openly, even those who had promised themselves they wouldn't. It was a moment that felt both proud and deeply painful. Then something unexpected happened, something that no one would ever forget. As the honor guard moved to fold the flag, Rex suddenly pulled free from the leash. He ran forward, his paws hitting the ground with urgency, and leaped up onto the casket. The sound of gasps filled the air, but no one moved to stop him. He placed his front paws on the polished wood and lowered his head, resting it gently against the surface. A soft sound came from his throat, half whine, half sigh. It was not loud, but it carried across the field like a voice. For a long moment no one spoke. The sight of the loyal dog lying across his handler's casket froze everyone where they stood. Even the chaplain had tears in his eyes. One of the officers, a man who had worked beside Daniel for years, wiped his face roughly and whispered, "He's saying goodbye." The photographer who had been covering the event lowered his camera and stood silently. It didn't feel right to capture something so sacred. Daniel's mother rose slowly from her chair and walked toward Rex. The crowd parted to let her through. She reached out and placed her hand gently on Rex's back. "It's all right, boy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's at peace now." Rex lifted his head slightly as if hearing her words, then pressed it back down again, refusing to move. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. "He loved you, you know. He really did." The scene lasted only a few minutes, but to everyone there it felt eternal. Finally, when the service came to a close, Rex was guided back gently. He resisted at first, turning his head again and again toward the casket, but eventually he followed quietly. His tail hung low and his eyes remained on the spot where Daniel lay. As the casket was lowered, Rex sat down beside Daniel's mother, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his fur, whispering words that no one else could hear. The ceremony ended in complete silence. Even after the crowd began to leave, many stayed behind, standing near the grave, unable to walk away. An officer later said that he had never seen so many grown men cry at once. But it wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, a sense of witnessing love in its purest form, a bond that even death could not break. That image, Rex lying across Daniel's casket, spread quickly after the service. Someone had quietly taken a photograph after all, and it was soon shared across the country. People from every corner sent messages of sympathy to the police department. Letters arrived from children, veterans, and families who had lost loved ones. Some wrote that they had never believed animals could feel love the same way humans did, until they saw Rex. But Rex didn't know about any of that. He only knew that the person who had been his world was gone. That night, back at the station, he sat by Daniel's locker and placed his head against the cold metal door. The other officers didn't have the heart to move him. One of them left the locker door slightly open, and Rex reached inside, pulling out Daniel's old cap. He lay down beside it, eyes open but far away. Days turned into weeks, and the story of that funeral continued to touch hearts. Newspapers wrote about it. Television programs shared the moment. People said that the bond between a man and his dog had reminded them of something they had forgotten, The power of loyalty, the quiet beauty of love that asks for nothing in return. At the cemetery, Daniel's grave was covered with flowers. Some were from family, others from strangers who had seen the story. A few weeks later, a small wooden sign appeared beside the headstone. It read, "Forever Partners, Officer Daniel Hayes and K9 Rex." It was placed there by Daniel's fellow officers, and though life at the department continued, new calls, new duties, there was always a space that felt empty. In the early mornings when the shift began, someone would glance toward the corner where Daniel and Rex used to stand, waiting for orders, and for a second, it felt like they were still there. No one who attended that funeral ever forgot what they saw that day. It wasn't just the farewell of a man and his dog. It was a reminder of what true companionship means. It was about faith that doesn't fade, love that doesn't speak in words, and loyalty that doesn't end even when the world says it must. After the funeral, the world seemed quieter. The police station that once felt full of life now carried an emptiness that words could not fill. Daniel's desk stayed untouched for weeks. His jacket still hung on the chair, his name tag shining faintly in the sunlight that came through the window. No one had the courage to move it. And every morning Rex would walk straight to that spot, sniffing the chair, then lying down beside it as if waiting for Daniel to return. The officers tried their best to comfort the loyal dog. They took turns feeding him, brushing his fur, and taking him for walks, but Rex's heart was somewhere else. He moved slowly, ate little, and often sat facing the door, ears perked up whenever he heard footsteps. Each sound made him hope it was Daniel. When it wasn't, he would lower his head again. The sight of it broke everyone's heart. Lieutenant Moore, Daniel's old supervisor, gathered the team one afternoon. "We can't let him fade like this," he said softly. "He deserves peace, not pain." Some officers suggested retraining Rex for another handler, but others quickly disagreed. "He won't accept anyone else," one said quietly. "To him, Daniel is still his only partner." And they were right. Every time someone tried to give Rex new commands, he stayed still, watching them with quiet eyes but not responding. It wasn't disobedience. It was grief. One day, when Daniel's mother came to visit the station, she found Rex lying near the locker again. She knelt beside him and whispered, "He's gone, sweetheart, but he loved you. You were his pride." Rex looked at her, tilting his head slightly as if recognizing her voice from the many times she had visited Daniel's home. His eyes softened, and for a brief moment his tail moved once, slow and tired. She smiled through tears and said, "Would you like to come home with me for a while?" The officers agreed it might help. So that evening, Rex was brought to Daniel's house, now quiet, with lights turned low and rooms filled with memories. The moment they entered, Rex paused at the door. He sniffed the air, then walked straight to the bedroom where he had once slept beside Daniel's bed. He circled once and lay down, resting his head on the floorboards. Daniel's mother watched from the doorway, her eyes filling again. "He remembers," she whispered. In the days that followed, Rex began to adjust to the new rhythm. Daniel's mother, though elderly, gave him all the care she could. She talked to him often, even when he didn't respond. "You were his best friend," she would say as she poured his water. "Now you have to be strong for him." Slowly, Rex began to show small signs of healing. He followed her around the house, waited near the window when she left, and slept near her rocking chair in the evenings. Though he was still quiet, there was a softness returning to his eyes, a spark of life that had been missing since that terrible day. Then a few weeks later, Daniel's widow, Emily, came to visit. She had been living in another town, coping with her own grief. When she saw Rex again, she knelt beside him and said softly, "Hey, old friend. You remember me, don't you?" Rex's ears perked up and his tail wagged gently. He sniffed her hands and leaned against her as if he had finally found someone who carried a familiar part of Daniel's heart. Tears filled her eyes. "He always said you were family," she whispered, hugging his neck. After that visit, Emily decided to bring Rex home with her. She lived in a small house near the edge of town, surrounded by open fields and quiet roads. The kind of place Daniel would have loved. The police department supported her decision, believing it was the best thing for both of them. When she brought Rex home, he explored the rooms carefully, sniffing every corner. Emily showed him Daniel's old photo on the wall and said, "See? He's still watching us." Rex stared at the picture for a long time, then looked back at her as if understanding. Days turned into weeks, and something beautiful began to happen. Rex started to come back to life. He followed Emily everywhere, into the kitchen, the garden, even when she went to check the mailbox. At night, he lay near her bed just like he used to with Daniel. Every morning, she would wake up, pat his head, and say, "Let's make him proud today." Rex would wag his tail and bark softly, as if answering her. Emily began volunteering at the local police community center, and she often brought Rex along. At first, people recognized him immediately. "That's Officer Hayes's dog," someone would whisper. "The one from the funeral." But soon they saw more than that. They saw a dog who still carried his partner's spirit, calm, strong, loyal. Children loved him. They would come running to pet him, and Rex would patiently sit still, letting them hug him. Emily often told them, "He's a hero in his own way." One afternoon, during a visit to a nearby school, a little girl asked Emily, "Does Rex miss his dad?" The question caught her off guard. She knelt down and smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart, he does," she said softly. "But he also knows that love doesn't stop when someone's gone. He's still carrying it every day." The girl nodded seriously and hugged Rex, whispering, "You're a good boy." Rex licked her hand, and everyone around smiled. Even though time passed, Rex never forgot Daniel. Sometimes at night, when Emily played soft music, Rex would lie near the window looking out at the stars. Emily liked to imagine that he was thinking about the old patrol nights, the car rides, and the quiet talks he used to share with his best friend. She would sit beside him, stroke his fur, and whisper, "He'd be proud of you, you know." Rex would sigh softly, resting his head on her lap. There were moments when Emily also found comfort in Rex's presence. She missed Daniel terribly, but being with Rex made her feel that a part of him still lingered close by. They helped each other heal quietly and patiently. Some evenings she would take Rex to visit Daniel's grave. The path was peaceful, lined with wildflowers. When they reached the headstone, Rex would sit down and stare at it for a long time. Emily would place fresh flowers and say, "We're both doing okay, Daniel." Sometimes Rex would let out a small, low sound, almost like a sigh, and rest his head near the stone. Those visits became their shared ritual, a way of keeping Daniel's memory alive. Seasons changed, and the house began to feel like a home again. The laughter of visiting friends returned. The smell of home-cooked meals filled the kitchen, and Rex's steps no longer sounded heavy. He had found peace not by forgetting, but by learning to live with love that stayed even after loss. People who met him could feel something special in his presence. It wasn't just that he was a trained police dog. It was that he carried an invisible warmth, a reminder of loyalty that never faded. Emily sometimes sat on the porch watching Rex nap under the evening sun. "You kept your promise," she'd whisper. "You stayed loyal till the end." And maybe somewhere beyond what eyes could see, Daniel was smiling, grateful that the bond he had built with Rex had not been broken by time or distance. Months passed, and life slowly found a gentle rhythm again. The house that once felt heavy with silence now carried a quiet peace. Emily had learned to smile more often, though she never forgot the ache of missing Daniel. Rex had become her shadow, always beside her, always watching, always protecting. Together they carried Daniel's memory in their hearts. Every morning began with the same ritual. Emily would brew her coffee, pat Rex's head, and say, "Let's make him proud today," and Rex, as always, would wag his tail softly, ready for another day. Over time, word spread about Rex and his loyalty. People had not forgotten the moment at the funeral when he had lain across Daniel's casket. That story had traveled far beyond their small town. Letters still arrived from strangers who had read about him, letters filled with kind words, prayers, and drawings from children. Some wrote, "Rex taught me what true love means," while others said, "He reminded me never to give up on loyalty." Emily kept all those letters in a wooden box beside Daniel's badge. She often read them aloud to Rex at night, smiling through her tears. One spring morning, Emily received an invitation from the police department. They were organizing a memorial event to honor officers who had served with great courage and heart. Daniel's name was on that list, and they asked if she and Rex would attend. Emily looked at the letter for a long moment, feeling her chest tighten. She knelt beside Rex and whispered, "They want us to go, boy. It's time to show them that you're still his partner." Rex looked up at her, eyes calm and bright, and let out a small bark, as if agreeing. The day of the event arrived with golden sunlight and a soft breeze. The ceremony was held in the courtyard of the police headquarters, where a tall flag waved gently in the air. Officers stood in neat lines, their uniforms crisp, their expressions solemn yet proud. Families of fallen heroes filled the seats, holding photos and flowers. Emily walked in quietly, holding Rex's leash. As they moved through the crowd, people turned to look. Many recognized the famous pair instantly. Some whispered, "That's Rex, Daniel Hayes' dog." Others simply smiled warmly, their eyes soft with respect. Rex walked tall beside Emily, wearing his vest with Daniel's badge attached near the collar. Though years had passed, his posture still carried pride and purpose. When they reached the front row, Emily sat down and Rex lay beside her, his head resting near her feet. The sound of the bugle began, a slow, sorrowful tune that touched every heart present. The names of officers were called one by one. When Daniel's name echoed through the speaker, a hush fell over the crowd. "Officer Daniel Hayes," the announcer said, his voice steady but emotional, "and K9 Rex, partners forever in service and spirit." At that moment, Rex lifted his head. His ears twitched slightly and he looked toward the sky. Then, without any command, he let out a soft, low howl, a sound filled with memory, love, and something deeper that words could not describe. The sound carried across the courtyard, echoing against the walls, wrapping around everyone like a whisper from the past. People stopped breathing for a second. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Even the toughest officers looked away, their jaws trembling. Emily placed her hand on Rex's head and whispered, "He heard you, boy." "I know he did." When the ceremony ended, the police chief came forward and handed Emily a plaque. On it was written, "In honor of Officer Daniel Hayes and K9 Rex, the unbreakable bond." The chief's voice shook slightly as he said, "Their story reminded us all what service truly means: courage, loyalty, and love that goes beyond duty." Emily thanked him quietly, her eyes glistening. She looked down at Rex, who stood proudly by her side, tail moving gently. It felt as if Daniel's spirit was right there with them, standing tall and proud. From that day on, Rex and Emily became an important part of the department's family. They visited schools, community centers, and police training sessions. Emily would share Daniel's story and talk about how love and loyalty can change hearts. Rex always came along, calm and gentle, letting children pet him and resting his head in their laps. His presence spoke louder than words ever could. Many new officers said that whenever they felt tired or discouraged, they thought of Daniel and Rex, and it gave them strength. A year later, something special happened. The police department decided to open a new K9 training facility. They named it the Hayes Rex Academy. On the day of the opening, a large banner was hung above the gate. Emily stood there holding Rex's leash, watching as young handlers trained their new dogs inside the field. One of the instructors walked up to her and said, "This place exists because of them, because they showed us what real partnership looks like." Emily smiled through tears. "He would have loved this," she whispered. Rex looked up at the banner as if he understood. As time moved on, Rex grew older. His fur began to gray around the muzzle and his steps slowed, but his eyes stayed bright. Emily treated him with gentle care, making sure he was comfortable. On quiet afternoons, he would rest on the porch while she read or worked in the garden. Sometimes she would talk to him as if Daniel were listening through him. "He would be proud of you," she'd say softly. "You never let him down." Rex would lift his head slightly as though understanding every word. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily sat beside Rex on the porch. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the same colors Daniel used to love watching after long patrols. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice warm but filled with memory. "You kept your promise, and I think he's smiling somewhere up there." Rex rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed, calm and content. That moment held everything: love, peace, and the quiet ending of a story that had touched so many hearts. Rex lived several more happy years, surrounded by care, love, and the peace he had earned. When he eventually passed, it was gentle and quiet in his sleep, with Emily beside him. She placed her hand on his fur, tears streaming down her face, but there was no pain this time, only gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You kept him alive in my heart." Later, he was laid to rest beside Daniel under a small tree at the cemetery. The headstone was engraved with simple words, "Together forever." Daniel and Rex. Over time, the story of the loyal police dog and his fallen partner became a legend in their town. New recruits were told about them during training. Children learned about them in school assemblies. A small statue of Daniel and Rex was placed at the entrance of the Hayes Rex Academy. A bronze figure of a man and his faithful dog standing side by side, looking ahead toward the horizon. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Loyalty never dies." Every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's passing, officers and townspeople gathered there to lay flowers. Some brought their own dogs, others just came to stand in silence. Emily always came too, though her hair had turned silver with time. She would touch the statue gently, smile, and say, "He's still watching over us." And somewhere in the wind, it always felt like Rex was there too, his spirit running free, faithful as ever. Their story lived on not because it was sad, but because it reminded people of something pure, the kind of love that doesn't fade, the kind of bond that even time can't break. Daniel and Rex had taught everyone that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms and sometimes they have paws. But what truly makes them heroes is their heart, and so, long after their names were spoken for the last time, their legacy continued to shine quietly in the hearts of all who heard it. A story of a man and his loyal dog, who proved that love once given never really ends.